Hello everyone and welcome back to the Belgian Beer Brothers channel. I am still Cedric and today we are gonna taste another beer. It's gonna be another classic because I felt like having a stout, and yeah, what's your first go-to when you want a stout? Guinness, of course. Guinness today distributed here by Anthony Martin, John Martin's son. Anthony Martin now brewing at Antwerp Brewing Company, which we talked about 2 weeks ago. And Anthony Martin also owns Timmermans Brewery, the Geuze Brewery, with which they actually do collaborations every now and then. So we went full circle here. Anywho, first off, let's talk about what kind of beer this is. Originally, in the UK, brewers brewed some ales, of course, but they also brewed some very, very dark beers, usually top fermented, and that was, the color was as dark as it is, or as it was, because they used black malt. This dark beer, mainly developed in London, got really popular with the porters, so the local sailors, and that's where it got its name, because it was called a porter back then. Now, it was first mentioned in literature in 1721, and it mainly meant very dark beers brewed with black malt and with different ABVs. Mainly top fermented, some low fermented. Now, although the word stout was first documented for a beer in general in the 1600s, I believe 1677, in the Egerton manuscripts, which you can see in London, I believe, in one of the museums. In the 18th century, basically, stout became a word for a strong porter, because it was called a stout porter back then, and that mainly meant a porter of about 8 to 9% ABV, maybe a bit stronger. Today the use of the name stout, mainly is intertwined with porter. Actually, currently the brands actually just choose which name they give their beer, or which kind their beer is. Guinness, for example, started with ales, then went over to porters, and then named it stouts, but we're gonna talk about that a bit later on. I said black malt, and I deliberately chose that name because there is also roasted malt, peated malt, smoked malt, all kinds of dark malts, but here we are talking about specifically black malt, also known as patent malt back in the days, because the guy who invented it patented it, and apparently back in that time it was the only patented malt on the market. Now, black malt is made basically by roasting the grains instead of kilning. I don't know if that sounds logical, but they actually kiln the malt at about 200 degrees centigrade. 200 degrees, that's pretty much above the point of carbonizing the outer shell. So we're actually burning the hell out of these grains. This is also known as the Maillard reaction, named after the chemist that once described it in literature. And this process does several things. It makes the malt very, very dark, of course, but also it kills, or actually destroys, all enzymes, which in turn has an effect on the sugars and starch in the grain, but we're not going into detail. I'm not a biochemist, and that's not what this series is about. What it does do is it contributes hugely to the taste and the color of the beer. So the color in your beer, in your finished product, is actually formed mainly by the malt. Of course, if we're not talking about barrel-aged or fruit beers. This malt makes the beer very dark in color and also provides a roasty, ashy undertone in the taste, and provides some coffee flavors because the malt is roasted just like coffee beans. Now, over to Guinness, because there is quite a bit to be said about this brewery. They have been around for 263 years. Guinness, let's see how I can say this safely without you guys pointing out a lot of mistakes. Basically, Guinness started out at St. James Brewery in Dublin and was founded by Arthur Guinness in 1759. They originally brewed ales, and on December 31st, 1759, Arthur signed a lease to lease the grounds of this brewery. It was already a brewery before that, but it was empty. He signed a lease that said he had to pay £45 a year for the brewery and the grounds surrounding it, and the lease would last 9,000 years. I don't know if those £45 a year are indexed like we do in Belgium, but that was 1759. Now, they started brewing ales and several kinds of beers, nothing special back in the day, but in 1778 they started their first porter brew. Of course, they saw that porter was a very popular in England, in London mainly. So in 1778 they started brewing porters, and that is 20 years almost after they started the brewery, and also 10 years after they first exported beer, because in 1769 they exported their first batch, and this is a huge export, 6.5 barrels of beer. Yeah, but that's where it all started, because if you think about it, they exponentially grew over the coming 250 years. They are still one of the largest alcoholic brands in the world, and Guinness is being brewed in over 50 countries and sold in 120 countries. That's, you could call that a big brewery. Anywho, moving on to the 1840s. We're making a big leap here, but we're not gonna cover all 263 years because this would be a 7-hour video, and I wouldn't take away the fun for people visiting the brewery. In the 1840s, the names single and double stout were used for the first time. These were stouts, obviously, of respectively 7.5 and 9% ABV. So again, here they brew heavier beers and they start using the name stout instead of porter. Not only because of the alcohol content of the beer, also because there was a shift in mentality. The porters were seen as plain beer, and they wanted to go a bit more high-end. Popularity was going down, so they wanted to sell more, and they changed the name and the recipe, as happens often. Lo and behold, it worked, because in the next few years they almost doubled their sales, and in 1886 they go public. At that time, Their sales is at 1.138 million barrels a year. And even though they refused to advertise, they did not own any public houses or pubs. And they actually, didn't go through much trouble to sell their beer. Their shares oversold by 20 times, and they closed the first day on a premium of 60 cents, which was huge for that time. Then around 1900, of course Arthur had died a long time before, but around 1900 Guinness implements a revolutionary personnel policy. They had 5,000 employees, and I've read that in the 1930s about 1 in 10 men in Dublin worked for Guinness, directly or indirectly. But in the 1900s, early 1900s, they implemented a revolutionary personnel policy for all 5,000 of their employees. And this policy contained some brand new things. For example, they provided free healthcare, education. They paid about between 10 and 20% above the average wage. They implemented paid leave, which was unheard of at the time. Many places never had that until the 1950s even, or the 1930s. In 1907, it was calculated that this policy amounted to about 20% of the total wage cost for the company. So that was a 20% extra that they didn't have to pay, but they voluntarily did. And apparently it worked out because all their employees were happy as hell. Of course, we're in the early 1900s, so as in many stories, 1914 comes around and World War I starts. Actually, even though Ireland wasn't really involved, the St. James brewery employees were encouraged to take part in the war, to go to the military and fight. And about 800 of them did so. About 700 of them returned. Why were these employees so eager to go and fight, to pick up weapons? Well, again here, Guinness actually provided some pretty good deals for the people. Namely, their families continued to receive half of their wage while the men were at the front. So on top of their military pay, they got half of their wage at the brewery as well. So this was pretty lucrative for the guys, or at least for the 700 that returned. On top of that, the brewery did guarantee them a job upon return, and a few years before that they implemented a widow pension. So even if the men died, their wife would still get a piece of their wage for the rest of their life. Again, a big leap, 1959 now. So we skipped the Second World War. Well, I can say one thing about the Second World War. Actually, Ireland didn't want to fight in the Second World War, and to put pressure on Ireland, Great Britain implemented a ban on all products. So actually, like an embargo. And because demand for Guinness was so high in 1941, they had to lift that ban. Whole other story. 1959. I believe that in 1959 they pushed through their biggest change in production up until now. Because in 1959 they started using nitrogen instead of carbon dioxide. Of course, during fermentation, carbon dioxide is naturally formed by the yeast, but all big breweries add carbon dioxide in their process, and Guinness stopped doing that. Guinness started using nitrogen. What comes out of that? You get tinier bubbles, and you get a way smoother and thicker foam, which hopefully we will see in a few minutes. That's of course what we notice as users, as consumers. But another great advantage of this is that you can put more pressure on the beer without it going fizzy. Nitrogen is a lot less soluble than carbon dioxide. Technically that means you can shake a can and it won't explode. So we remember, since 1959, thicker, creamier foam, tinier bubbles. Of course, in a pub, if you want to get a draft Guinness, it's being pushed out by nitrogen and not CO2, and because it's less soluble, yeah, you have to find a way to put it in there. Now, Van Onze Broek Kasteelbier in Belgium has found one way of doing that. We're gonna talk about them in a few weeks probably, but they have a nitro series. In a Guinness draft, right at the very end, just before the tap, there's a perforated plate, and the beer is pushed through that perforated plate, and there's so much whirling and movement that it gets whooshed and swished all around, and that makes the nitrogen solve better in the beer. I know I just made this explanation a lot more complex than it could have been. Now, how do they do that with cans? I don't know if you can hear it. My can rings. So there is a little widget inside here, and the widget is actually a tiny ball. Some say it contains the nitrogen. That is half true, but it's not like they blow up the ball with nitrogen and then throw it in the can. It's actually a ball with very, very minuscule dimples, like a golf ball but shrunk down, and that retains the nitrogen, and by moving around in the can it releases the nitrogen, then being solved in the beer. Over to 1960, another change was made. In 1960 they ceased using wooden casks. So originally Guinness was being brewed and aged or stored in wooden casks, and the story even goes that, or yeah, that's not a story, it's a fact, they used to blend part of old aged beer with every new brew, probably mainly to average out the taste throughout production and throughout all deliveries. These days we believe the brewery doesn't do that anymore, but the brewery itself refuses to comment on that statement. So yeah, I can't tell you if it's true or not. They replaced all the wooden casks by aluminium kegs and tanks, and started modernizing, as everyone did. In the 1980s, again, political unrest in the brewery, because the IRA they continued bombing and attacking cities and landmarks in London and around London, and they spread throughout the whole Great Britain. So Guinness actually thought about abandoning their iconic harp as a logo. As many of you will know, the harp is also the national symbol of Ireland. And it was associated with the IRA because they carried flags with harps. Actually, a fun story about that is Guinness trademarked the harp logo first. So they got into a bit dispute with the Irish government, and the government wanted to trademark the harp, but they had to use the mirror image because Guinness wouldn't give up their trademark. Again, side story. After a lot of thinking and talking, they didn't abandon the harp, and the IRA went dormant, let's say. They calmed down. Many of them got caught. A bit later on, in 1997, Guinness merged. So they held out for a good 230 years, 40 even. They merged with, and I don't really know how to pronounce this, but I think it's Diego or Diageo or something. Let's say Diego. But in the merger, they retained all rights and all trademarks. They actually remained separate entities. So they traded under the Diego name, but they still operated and produced everything under the Guinness flag. So for all intents and purposes, I'm just gonna keep saying Guinness, mainly because I don't want to mispronounce Diego 70 times in this video. After the merger in the early 2000s, or the nillies as the hip kids say, some breweries in Great Britain were closed down and moved to Ireland. Everyone believes it's because they wanted to take advantage of the 12.5% company tax instead of the 28% tax in England. Of course, Diego denied that. But yeah, doesn't matter why, at least they did it. They kept innovating, and in 2017 they implemented a new filtration process. The old one was, they used a clarification method with basically gelatinized fish bones, and now they use another agent to clarify their beer, making it vegan actually. So I'm having my first vegan beer, which is of course bullshit. I've had many vegan beers, but these were the first smart enough to advertise with it. Today, like I said, Guinness is being brewed in over 50 countries, and about 120 countries sell it. But it is pretty much another beer than it used to be. It's still a stout with some nice black malt in it, but now it's with nitrogen instead of CO2. These days they recommend drinking it at 6 or 7 degrees centigrade, while in the early days they said cellar temperature, so 13 degrees, or some even recommended room temperature, which is 18 to 20 degrees, which is quite warm. Basically you could be drinking coffee then. It's been said that back in the days when they mixed it with aged beer, it gave a nice lactic acid flavor, a tang, so to say. Basically, people say it's still in there. I wouldn't know because I can't compare. I've only been around for 35 years, probably drinking for 20 of them, and I can't tell you. I actually used to hate Guinness because I also don't like coffee and coffee flavors, and I learned to appreciate it. That happens when you have friends working in an Irish pub and you insist on celebrating St. Paddy's Day with them every year. Anywho, the brewery says that the perfect pour for a Guinness is a double pour from Draught, meaning you fill up the glass, you let the foam settle down, and then you fill it up with beer to the edge, leaving a slight centimeter of foam. That's something completely different than what we say in Belgium. For a Pilsner you need 2 fingers of foam. For a Guinness it's actually only 1 finger, and you can't have fat fingers. For many craft beers we say fill her up. There's also been some discussion about the color. It's called the black stuff, the black gold, the black and tan. One thing that always returns is black. The brewery confirmed that this beer is not black, it is actually a very dark ruby red. And if you look at it closely, you will see that this is true. I have to confirm it as well. And one last fun fact about the brewery. When a Guinness brewer at the St. James Brewery, or St. James Gate Brewery actually, was planning on marrying a Catholic girl, he was asked to resign. Apparently the Guinness bosses were so anti-Catholic that until the 1960s they never employed a Catholic, and until 1939, if you wanted to marry someone Catholic, or even just from a Catholic family, you were asked to resign and never come back again. Okay, enough about politics and religion and commerce and all that. Let's go over to the fun part. I have my classic Guinness glass, because this is the one without the fold in it. This is a remake of the original. Should have cleaned it actually. Anywho, the harp, the Guinness logo, and a nice sticker on here. I have never used this glass before. I have once. And this sticker says An Sibhin Paddy's Day 2021. I actually got this glass. I went to St. Patrick's Day in Antwerp. One of my favorite pubs is An Sibhin, and they were handing out tombola tickets with every Guinness you drank. I had 2, and I won a bottle of champagne and a couple of cans of Guinness and this glass, which was fun because I collect glasses and I didn't have a Guinness glass at the time. Also, here on the bottom, if you guys can't see it, but they added a sticker with sláinte, or cheers in Gaelic. For those of you following Rampant Lion reviews, you will have heard this word because James always ends with sláinte before he drinks. And about the glass, hashtag proper glassware, so Thomas is happy again as well. Over to the beer. I actually have never read a Guinness can. It has a lot of text on here, but not in English, which is funny. Beer brewed in Ireland. Thanks to the floating widget in this can, you can also enjoy the real flavor of Guinness at home as if it came out of the pub. The widget might make a rattling sound. Don't shake. Enjoy. Okay then. It's been in the cellar for quite a while. That's aggressive. This actually felt like it was gonna gush all over. Thank God it didn't. There we go. Now look at the bottom of the glass and look at those layers forming. Here we go. Now if you look at this glass, the lower half, it seems as if here in the middle the bubbles are going downward, and that's not because nitrogen is heavier or anything, because actually it's not. Carbon dioxide is heavier and nitrogen is a lot lighter. Don't worry, I'm not gonna turn this into a chemistry lesson, but it may seem so because when the beer settles down, the gas has to go somewhere, and gas often goes up because gas most of the time is lighter than liquid. And here we go with the double pour. Nice and roasty. And here we see that the bubbles actually experience a lot of drag going through the liquid, and they start tumbling, and that's why it looks, at least on the side of the glass, on the glass wall, it looks as if they go down, but in reality they are still going up. So here we can see that my glass wasn't as clean as it should have been, because some nitrogen bubbles are sticking to the side, and that shouldn't be. But the foam has nicely settled in. I have a nice finger of foam as predicted. If I hold this into the light, maybe. Nope, I don't have a flashlight here, but you can see that this is a very, very, very dark ruby red. A nice beige, thick, dense foam, minuscule bubbles, as we said, nitrogen. This is also why they call it the black and tan. Tan is a Old English word for beige, or a shade of beige. So we call it black and tan, while it's actually red and beige. Smells like coffee, smells like mornings. Smells very, very roasty and ashy, as they said. Slightly bit woody. Basically smells like a forest fire. Also, another difference that I forgot to mention is the ABV. So this is Guinness Draught Stout. This is their main product right now, but the original Guinness Stouts, like I said, were 7.5 and 9% ABV. This one is 4.2, or at least they call it 4.2. It should be between 4.1 and 4.3, so 4.2 is the consensus. Okay. Yeah, that goes in very smoothly. Even though the mouthfeel is very thin, because there is not much carbon dioxide and the nitrogen is very tiny, very, how can I say this? You don't feel it coming in, and it doesn't take your breath away like a lot of carbon dioxide would. So the mouthfeel is very thin, slightly watery, but it's still quite heavy, and the creaminess of the foam and the beer itself compensate. As advertised, a lot of roasty and mainly even ashy flavors. I'd like to say slightly hoppy, but even though this is a beer made with hops, I do believe that the bitterness comes from the black malt. Not to be mistaken for black mold, that's a whole other story. And I do get that tiny, very thin acidic edge. So it's not really a sourness or something. It's just a, yeah, like they said, a tang, a bit of a feeling on the side of your tongue. Also, you will have seen that I took my time to pour this beer, and Guinness is a brewery that does a lot of research. If you Google Guinness tea test, for example, letter T dash test, you will see a lot of results. They hired statisticians, they researched a lot of production processes and streamlined a lot of them, but even more than other breweries did so. I mean, they were the first to implement nitrogen, and they employed the guy, the mathematician turned brewer that invented the procedure. But they also researched the perfect pour, and they went further than just saying it's a double pour and let it settle in. They actually defined that the perfect pour, so first stage, the rest second stage, and topping it off, has to last 119.53 seconds, so just shy of 2 minutes. So I was pretty quick. All right, so I felt like a nice stout. I brought out the mother of all stouts, still going strong, and I'm gonna enjoy this a bit further. As usual, if you like this video, comment, like, let me know your opinion. I have seen on my last video that on the Lindemans anniversary beer video, that someone commented, this tastes like dog crap. Yeah, look, hey, everyone's entitled to their opinion. I couldn't say, I have no comparison because I never ate dog crap, but if that's your thing, go ahead, let me know in the comments. Apart from that, I am going to reduce my output from 3 a week to 2 a week because it's just too much, and I'm renovating a house, and soon I will be changing all of this decor. Yeah, and that's about it. In my next video, I am thinking of going back to the celebration of an anniversary, because we still have 3 breweries in Belgium that have their anniversary this year, and I can't decide which one I'm gonna take first. It's not gonna be Maretsu because they haven't announced their anniversary beer yet. That will be for the end of the year. But I am in doubt between Rodenbach and La Chouffe. So yeah, tune in on Sunday and let's see which one I choose. Also, let me know in the comments which is better for the viewers. Wednesday and Friday, Friday and Sunday, or Wednesday and Sunday. And I will just adjust to you guys. Cheers you guys, or as they say, sláinte.